How's everybody doing? Everybody doing well today? Thanks for coming. I'm Matt Jacobs. I'm director of the Bob Graham Center for Public Service. Happy to have you here today for our Business Journalist in Residence event, public program. I'm going to make a couple of opening remarks after my mic is turned on, apparently. Is it?
We can't.
Yeah?
You're loud. Keep going.
Okay. All right. The mic is on, actually, but okay. So a couple things before I actually introduce our student who will be running the rest of the program. The Bob Graham Center for Public Service, if you're not familiar with us, was founded in 2006 by former Florida Governor and U.S. Senator Bob Graham. Unfortunately, he did pass away this past April, so we're sad to have lost him. But the center remains as a legacy of his work and his commitment to public service and civic engagement. I'm asked around this time with a Business Journalist in Residence program pretty regularly, what's the connection between Graham Center and journalism and business in this context? So we've worked previously with the College of Journalism on a Science Journalist in Residence program, and this is the second Business Journalist in Residence program that we've done. When I'm talking about the Graham Center, I talk a lot about how we're here to help students no matter what their background, no matter what their academic path, and no matter what their career might be, if they're interested in civic engagement, public service, and public leadership. The engagement piece in terms of the business side here is actually really, really important, because if you want to be an elected official, we're obviously here to work with you. If you want to work in the nonprofit space, there's an obvious connection with the Graham Center for Public Service. The private sector, people might not see that connection quite so obviously, but I would say if you're working in the private sector and you're not considering how you engage, lead, and serve in your community, you may not be in the private sector for very long because your business isn't going to survive, right? So that's one piece with how we're trying to connect with students. But on the journalist side here, the Business Journalist in Residence, and I think today's guest is a quintessential example of this, the connections between business and the public space and the public sphere is actually vital. And again, I'm not going to introduce our speaker and go into her background, but her work exemplifies that. And it is a perfect demonstration of why we here in the Graham Center are really happy to be a partner on this program and to host this event, because it demonstrates the explicit connection between the private sector, business, the economy, and the work of the public space and the stuff that takes place in that public space. So I just wanted to make that quick point. The U.S. Business Journalist in Residence program invites leading reporters in business and economics to campus to share their expertise with the campus community through class visits, public talks, and meetings with faculty and researchers in their area of coverage. The program is supported by the Warrington College of Business and the College of Journalism and Communications, and the public talk is obviously hosted by the Bob Graham Center for Public Service and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So we're delighted that this is really a cross-campus initiative as well that really does bring different parts of this campus together around this. We're also delighted that this is a space where a student gets to also take center stage. In this case, Jolie Dresner is a third-year marketing major and public wealth management, wealth and asset management minor, and she's also working on her combined Master's of Science degree in Business Administration, again with a concentration in marketing. She serves as Vice President of the Gator Wealth and Asset Management Club. So in 2 years, she'll be ready to manage your resources. I'm stealing a joke that was given to me earlier today. So open up your wallets there. But not to embarrass you there, but she's worked as a fundraising coordinator at the University of Florida Foundation, so putting those asset management skills to good use, and will be interning next summer for Bank of America Merrill Lynch Private Bank in Miami. So without further ado, I'm going to step aside. I do lastly, though, want to say thank you also to the team here at the center for all the work they do on these programs, and for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and College of Journalism for running the live stream off from this too. This is being live streamed as well. So thank you. And Jolie.
Journalism and political science programs. After graduating, she went on to work for the Miami Herald. There, she used her programming skills to report on elections, medical malpractice, and political influence, and co-authored the book, The Grifters Club. At the Herald, she was also named a finalist for the Livingston Award for national reporting. Ostroff then joined the Wall Street Journal as a cryptocurrency reporter, where she continues to report on the rise and fall of exchanges and their influential leaders, as well as other political and financial news. Among other stories, she has covered Bitcoin's surprisingly enduring strength, allegations of currency manipulation in Nigeria, the downfall of cryptocurrency exchange FTX and its founder Sam Bankman-Fried, and the cryptocurrency industry's $100 million campaign war chest it is spending on the 2024 election.
That was perhaps an overly flattering welcome from Jolie. It's so weird to be back here because when I was a freshman, I used to sit in the back and pray that no one would look at me too closely as I listened to various lecturers who came through here. So it's very weird to be standing up here. This is also karma for the many times that I bailed on my public speaking class in the journalism school to instead go report stories for the Alligator. So I'm not convinced that this wasn't intentional. So Jolie gave a bit of my background, so my name's Caitlin Ostroff. I'm a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. I've been there for the past 5 years, and in that time I have used a lot of data journalism skills that I have, many of which I learned here at the College of Journalism, to cover finance. And part of the thinking in having me on finance was what happens when you put a data technology type person onto a financial reporting beat, and I don't know if the editors are happy or upset with some of the things that I've done in the course of the last 5 years, but most of my focus as of late has been on crypto. I got into reporting on that topic in 2020 when crypto prices started to really go up. That was because this was the pandemic. There were stimulus checks given to people, whether they needed them for immediate rent, food, or not. And so you saw a lot of that money make its way into the stock market. You might remember the GameStop mania. But before that, it also made its way into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. For the last few months, a lot of my focus has been on crypto's growing influence in the 2024 election, not just from the perspective of the presidential race, but also for congressional races, because that's where actual laws are made. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. A little bit about me. There used to be a photo here before it decided it did not like my Google Slides. Again, I graduated class of 2018. I do use traditional reporting methods, talking to people, finding out information, but also data analysis and programming languages to find and report stories. And by complete accident, I am a crypto collapse expert. Did not intend to be that. So I've covered a bunch of different topics in my time and then kind of accidentally made my way into business reporting, but also data journalism. When I was at the Alligator, the independent publication in Gainesville, which covers a lot of campus and the community, a lot of my fellow journalists would sit there and they would be like, we got into journalism because we didn't like math. And I would kind of sit there quietly in the background going, yeah, down with math, very half-heartedly, because I got bored freshman year and took calculus. And so it was a speaker in one of my political science classes, actually, who introduced me to the concept of data journalism. And since then, that's kind of been my main focus. I took, Professor Lewis is sitting in the front here. I took every course that he offered in my last 2 years here, him and Professor Mindy McAdams in the J School. And so I started trying to figure out what I could do with data journalism in sort of this nascent field. So what is data journalism? First and foremost, it is journalism. It is finding out information that might be of interest to people and getting it out there. And you wind up talking to a lot of the people you might think. You speak to government officials, professors, company employees, just to see what interesting information may be out there. And you speak to as many people as you possibly can. But as the name implies, data journalism leans on significantly more data. And some of that data might be public. So if I wanted to take raw census data, we count how many people live where every 10 years. I might want to do a story that looks at on a level smaller than a zip code, what is the race, gender, income, household size in Gainesville, and how has that changed from the previous 10 years? Or I might file a public records request and get all of the salary data for all of the professors here, and then I might want to analyze it and break it down by college, tenure, and see if there are discrepancies in raises that happen, see if inflation-adjusted wages have gone up or down, and look for stories in there. Or you could go through and build your own database. You could go through a list of every alligator story from the last 15 years that says what the Accent Speakers Bureau pays for people to come and speak to students on campus, and you could build your own database looking at how much that is, how it varies by person, etc. And so once you have data, you often want to do something to the data to figure out what's happening. And sometimes that can be as simple as, an average excluding outliers in Excel. Sometimes that can be more complicated, of using a programming language to take large swaths of data and break it down into something ingestible. And so you can tell stories through words. That's more my speed. I'm very bad at visuals. But you can also use graphics to convey a point and make data very easily understandable to a broad audience. And for all of this data that data journalists sift through, it can be really hard to tell which stories are actually a byproduct of data journalism. And that's actually really intentional. Professor Lewis taught me that the best data stories are those in which there is one line, maybe, on the data that is analyzed. Because you want someone to walk away with the main finding, not with, a bunch of statistics that are going to go out of their head. You want to put forward the thing that is most surprising. And so sometimes it can be really hard to tell which story is a data story, and that's a bit by design. So I have always found with data stories that it is best to show by example rather than by lecture. And so I also tell this to students now because explaining data journalism can be really difficult. So my first job after college was as a data reporter at the Miami Herald. And this is an excerpt from a story I did with the Herald's tourism reporter, Taylor Dolvin. And it was about the cruise line Carnival. So Carnival had previously been convicted for polluting the ocean during its voyages, and it had been required to allow an independent monitor to be on board its ships to make sure that the company was reforming its practices. The monitor's findings in this case, which is not every case, were actually submitted to federal court, which meant that the documents were public. They were public, except for the fact that they basically took a spreadsheet and embedded it as images over hundreds of pages in the PDFs. And so if you actually wanted to see what was happening, you had to read through hundreds of pages, which I don't think anyone but me would find a particularly exciting exercise. And so I used a programming language called Python to extract all of the incidents and then rigorously fact-check to make sure that the program didn't goof and accidentally mess up a word or cut off information or something like that. And so we pulled all of this into a story, and it wound up, this is the top of the story, basically saying, more than 500,000 gallons of treated sewage wound up into protected oceans around ports and waters close to shores around the world, and we detailed some of this. We also published the raw extracted data online, and we linked it in the story because I care very much about transparency and the ability of the public to also see that the data, as it existed, because it is the public's right to have access to that public information. For some reason, Carnival wasn't nearly as excited about this as I was. It's still up. They called us at one point trying to argue that various things were wrong, and we had to sit there and be like, no, they're right, and you can see it in the spreadsheet. This is the second example that I'll show, and it relies on records requests. So in Florida, you're blessed or maybe cursed, depending on if you are a university employee, to live in a state where it is very easy to get information. And so in 2017, I was interning at the Miami Herald, and we had Hurricane Irma come through, And if you don't remember it or you didn't live in an area that was very impacted by Hurricane Irma, we steered away from the worst of it. I think it got downgraded at the last second and it veered a little bit to the west. But you still had a lot of power outages that happened in South Florida, even though the damage wasn't particularly bad. And what the power outages meant was, while you might think, oh, it sucks, I can't charge my phone, I can't maybe reach friends or loved ones, and that is terrible in itself, it was even worse if you lived in a nursing home that was suddenly without power. And what wound up happening was that at the Hollywood Hills Rehabilitation Center, 12 people died because the heat levels inside the building were rising near about 99 degrees inside. And so when this initially started happening, I got a call from my internship editor, and he was like, "Caitlin, you live in Broward, right?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." And he was like, "Okay, great, you're going here. Call us every hour, give us updates." And I was like, "Great." So I spent 14 hours camped outside there, baking in the sun. And in addition to, speaking to anyone that I could, we tried to get employees who were coming in and out of the building. We were also sitting there and trying to figure out what went wrong. And so one of the things that went wrong was that the nursing home was not on the state priority list for power restoration. And another thing that we thought of was, well, what was the emergency plan that was supposed to exist? What was supposed to be the plan in place to prevent this from happening? And so my colleague Carol Marvin Miller filed a records request to Broward County Office of Emergency Management asking for the nursing home's emergency management plan. And they actually gave it to us. Again, Florida Public Records are wonderful. And when she got it, she found that there had been no mention of how they were going to keep residents cool in the event of a prolonged power outages. They also copy and pasted at times from the previous year's submissions, and so there was no new work that appeared to have been done year by year. And so then we thought, okay, this is bad, but is Hollywood Hills an outlier? What does the rest of the county look like? What does the rest of the nearby counties that we cover look like? And so we filed records requests for Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Miami-Dade County in full, asking for a copy of every single emergency management plan for a nursing home and an assisted living facility that they had. Broward decided that they had released the first one in error after our first story came out, and they cited a state law designed to protect public spaces from terrorists. Palm Beach County did the same, but Miami-Dade County, to its credit, actually released it. And what we found in the 54 plans was shocking. Almost a quarter of them were completely blank. More than half didn't say how long it would need to have residents evacuate in the event of an emergency. And this did end up leading to a new state law requiring that nursing homes and assisted living facilities need to have generators for large facilities that can handle up to 4 days without air conditioning. This doesn't sound like a data story. It is in large part a public record story, but even a dumb little calculation of 25% of these plans were blank is a very powerful figure, and sometimes you don't need a high level of analysis to make a big point. Okay, so how the hell did I get into covering crypto? So after the Herald, I went to go work for the Wall Street Journal. I had interned there after college, and I went back to their London office. And I had no background in finance, but they had the thought of what happens if you take a data journalist and you throw them on the finance team. The first year, I didn't really start off covering crypto. As Jolie can relate to, it was a lot of learning a lot of weird financial jargon and feeling like I had been dropped into a new language. And then over time, the focus did end up being crypto. And so what is crypto? Crypto is digital currency. It's magic internet money. It's worthless. Or it's a speculative investment that's, quote, going to the moon, which is a favorite catchphrase of proponents who think that each token will be worth millions of dollars. What crypto is or isn't is very much in the eye of the beholder. The first cryptocurrency created was Bitcoin. I'm not going to go into anything technical because I don't think anyone wants to sit through that, but all you really need to understand is that Bitcoin was born out of the global financial crisis when some banks failed and others nearly did. and there was a profound lack of trust in the financial system. And for some people, the idea that there could be a currency that governments didn't control had some appeal. And Bitcoin, the first cryptocurrency, is basically that. It's a digital token that the government doesn't issue and whose supply can never increase. Unlike the US dollar, you can't hold it in your hands. What you actually have is just some lines of code. And we still don't even know who created it and why. To this day, that is a mystery. Over the years, as Bitcoin's price went through run-ups, people created more and more tokens. Some of these added new technological components, some of these built on the existing idea. Others were literally just internet jokes. At the top of the slide is the logo for Dogecoin, which is the Shiba Inu meme-inspired cryptocurrency that I have covered way too much of. And this was literally just created off the meme of a dog with bad spelling habits and thus Doge instead of dog. Other coins were scams, however, wanting to draw on hype and run away with the cash. And the reason that there's so many coins is because it's not actually that hard to create a cryptocurrency. It's a couple of lines of code that you can literally copy and paste from pre-existing cryptocurrencies. And because of that, if you change the logo, you give it a funny name, and voila, you've created magic internet money. People have been prophesizing the demise of crypto since its creation. It's something of a joke in the community, and there are sites that basically track comments to this effect. 15 years doesn't make a pattern. This is still a very young industry. Crypto prices could collapse tomorrow. But despite a high number of crashes that have happened in the industry, crypto has yet to go to zero. And some crypto products have, especially recently, become more ingrained in the traditional financial system, ironically the system that it was created to oppose. And so, by and large, crypto so far has been here to stay, despite what people originally thought. So, with this as a basis, you may not think that anyone would really care. This is a dog currency that is a joke. What's the harm? And crypto had the same base of appeal of people who might store their money in gold. It doesn't really sound like a threat. But when you think about it, there are some reasons that governments, including the US government, weren't necessarily going to be so gung-ho on crypto at the start. One, if you think about it, you have a non-government person or group creating coins that could possibly be used for payment. This is sort of the Treasury Department's whole thing. And so they have an obvious reason not to be thrilled there. And then you have a money supply that isn't controlled by the government, which is kind of the Federal Reserve's whole thing. And they want to make it easier, and the government wants to make it easier or harder to borrow money and grow the economy or slow the economy, basically, and maintain control over slow and stable growth. When you don't control the money supply, you don't really have that power. On top of that, again, Bitcoin was created by an unknown person or group of people, and it can easily be copied and repurposed and sold to someone else. And so all of these things kind of line up as reasons that the government might not exactly be super pro-crypto, especially at the start. And that's before you add in concerns over crypto being a speculative bet that people can lose money on or can be used in illicit activities. And I have some tweets and stories up there from former President Trump, from Hillary Clinton, the Chinese government, and so bipartisan, there has been a lot of concern historically over crypto and whether it should be adopted broadly. So since its creation, as I referenced, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have been extremely volatile. They often go through these boom-bust cycles, and I've had days where I've woken up on a Saturday morning to find that Bitcoin crashed 15% simply because someone tweeted something that was not true. And part of that historical volatility is because there's not that much money in crypto. The entire value of every single cryptocurrency that exists is about $2 billion. That sounds like a lot of money. That's about the value of every share of Apple together. And so if you put Apple in the context of the broader stock market, that is a drop in the bucket. And so it doesn't take that much money to move around the price of cryptocurrencies, which is why the value can fluctuate very quickly. And then I have a story here on El Salvador the day after they bought a bunch of Bitcoin, it tanking. So that being one example of its volatility recently. And so if you look at the y-axis, when I talk about volatility, I'm not talking about a $50 drop. I'm not talking about $100. If you look at the chart, you can see days where it appears to have gone up or down thousands and thousands of dollars. And so that can happen over the course of a day or a week, or it can happen in the course of 5 minutes. And that's why crypto winds up being, more volatile than other assets. And part of what that means is that people lose a lot of money. Some people do make money in crypto, some people make a lot of money in crypto, but not everyone is. And so you wind up having stories, including ones that I've had to write, in which certain coins collapse or certain scams happen, and people suddenly thought they had hundreds of thousands of dollars, or they put that money into it, and then all of a sudden, hours later, they do not. And so the story that I have up here is on a cryptocurrency that was supposed to be pegged to the US dollar. The idea was that it would always be worth $1, and it ended up going to zero. And so money that people had in there on a platform that had been touted as safe wound up being worth nothing. Because you don't need to be a genius to create or market a cryptocurrency, you do get a lot of scams that happen in the space. You have a number of tokens, just to be clear, that have existed for a number of years and seem to have value added to their communities and seem to be run by legitimate organizations. But with every sincere and real project, you do get some number of scams. And so, you have millions of cryptocurrencies and they're just going to exist. And so this up here is the case of Squid Game. If you're familiar with the Netflix show that was really popular a few years ago, I woke up one day and all of a sudden everyone was talking about Squid Game coin. And people within the journal flagged it. They were like, should we look into this? And I was like, absolutely not. There are a number of things here that make me worried that this could be a scam. We don't know who created it. It was created 2 weeks ago. For me, I just don't think we should be writing about it. And within 2 weeks, it had collapsed to zero, and whoever created it seems to have cashed out and left everyone else holding the bag. And so, particularly with new cryptocurrencies, you run a very high risk that you just don't know who's behind it or what the ramifications could be of putting money into it. Cryptocurrencies are harder to trace at times than traditional money for very technical reasons, but the basic idea is that if you guys go to Wells Fargo on campus, I think that's still the provider, they're going to ask you for your name, they're going to ask you for your address, they're going to ask you if you make real money, like what do you do, and all of that information is basically the bank's way of making sure that they're not moving money around that they should not be. They want to know if you deposit $100,000, is that scholarship money, is that loans to go to school, is that inheritance, and you need to have some sort of reason to back it up. If you work at Chick-fil-A and you suddenly deposit $100,000, that's going to come up as weird for them. With crypto, you don't really need to inherently give that information. Nowadays, some crypto platforms take a lot of that information, they do that due diligence, but there are still ways to create crypto accounts, either ones by an institution or not, where you don't have to give any information in order to hold cryptocurrencies. And so because of this, it can be an attractive way for criminals to move cash, particularly across borders. And so because of this, it has become a tool that exists within crime. And so this is one story that we did on how North Korea's hacker army stole $3 billion in crypto to fund its nuclear program. North Korea has a decent number of hackers who basically attempt to get as much crypto as they can because that is harder for the US government to immediately seize. As opposed to relatively small-scale scams, fraud has been a big concern within crypto the last 2 years, ever since the collapse of crypto exchange called FTX. A crypto exchange is basically just a marketplace. So if you think of eBay, for example, you post a good, someone buys it, you transact that. A crypto exchange is kind of the same in the sense that you can buy a cryptocurrency from that platform and they will credit your account for 1 Bitcoin or 1 Dogecoin. We're going to talk more about FTX later, and there were certainly other frauds that came before it, but these are just some of the barriers that crypto has faced with the government. And when you consider all of this, it makes a lot of sense why the industry would seek to change this and elect politicians who see crypto as a means of making the financial system more efficient by allowing for faster transactions, rather than just a means through which people can evade the law. So today we're going to talk about the current election, but I think it's important to note starting off that this isn't the first time that crypto money has been a part of an election cycle. Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder of the collapsed crypto exchange FTX, used to appear regularly on Capitol Hill and donate it to super political action committees that supported politicians that wanted to craft new legislation regulating the crypto industry. For years, crypto companies have also had lobbyists to boost their interest. And so in 2022, a crypto-friendly political action committee that Bankman-Fried and others contributed to raised more than $10 million, versus what's been raised today that looks like chump change. But this has been a factor back in 2022 as well. So basic rules of federal election donations. This is going to sound like no duh, but you never know. Donations need to be in your own name. Donations need to be your own money. And then there are some rules around maximum amounts that you can donate to different types of political committees. We're talking about this because in a second we're going to discuss people who break those rules. So in terms of combining the data journalism skills and the cryptocurrency skills, the election contribution data is a big one. So the Federal Election Commission data is public. All of your political donations that you have ever made are a public record. Nosy journalists like me can find them very easily. I have many scripts to pull them. And all of the political donations that a candidate receives are likewise public, which is why every election cycle you read about how much McDonald's and Burger King, Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump are eating. And so here's just a snippet of what the kind of public dashboard for the FEC data looks like. And I have in here the contributions made to the 2022 Political Action Committee that Bankman-Fried and others donated to. So FTX collapsed in late 2022. I'm not going to go into detail on events that led up to the crash or what caused it, but basically the idea was that people put money in FTX the way that you might a bank. They thought it was there and be theirs, and to a large degree, FTX did not have that money when everyone came calling in basically a bank run. And so FTX was instead spending customer money on speculative investments and on other activities. And one of those other activities was donating users' money to candidates, as prosecutors allege. 2 FTX executives have since pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations. One was the former head of engineering, and the other ran the company's Bahamas office. One donated primarily to Republican candidates, and the other donated primarily to Democratic candidates. And while one of them decided not to testify in Sam Bankman-Fried's trial that happened in late 2023, one of them did. And to the left is a snippet of a news story that we wrote off of the person who testified's testimony. And to the right is a transcript of his testimony. But basically what he said to the jury and to all of the reporters crammed in the back who had been camped out there since 4 a.m., as is glamorous, is that another FTX executive would prepare these donations for him to send in his name to different groups using customer money. So they would take customer money from the platform, they would say, we want you to send X amount of money to this candidate or this political action committee, and he would say, okay. Most of his donations went to liberal politicians, and while most of the conservative politicians' money made their way via someone else, The idea was that they would have to deal with the optics on donating to one political party, if it was the head of the company or if it was just one person donating to everything. And so this was seen within FTX as a way to kind of curry favor on both sides of the aisle, no matter who wound up winning in primaries or general elections. Just to give visuals, because trials are great for that, this is a screenshot of the Messenger platform that FTX executive used to organize donations. To the left, you can see that it's called donation processing. And this is from October 2022, and it includes a political consultant and 2 of the employees who were making the political contributions. And so this was introduced into evidence when one of them spoke about how he would be directed to donate money. Another detail that this person, Nishad Singh, shared in testimony that I still find insane is that he said that he would sign blank checks and gave them to someone else just to make donations for him. And so this is an extreme example, and it's not to say that there is a lot of campaign finance fraud or violations that happen, but it's one of those things where it is very hard to know when it is happening outside of court cases. And so we have had instances in the past in which the crypto industry has used money in less than kosher manners to try and influence political outcomes. That person hasn't been sentenced yet. Nishad Singh, he's supposed to be sentenced on October 30th. Ryan Salem was the first person from FTX outside of Bankman-Fried to be sentenced, but he got 7.5 years. And we'll see what Nishad ends up getting. But in giving the sentence for Ryan Salem, one of the things that the federal judge spoke at length about was the risk of election interference and the risk that money in politics poses to democracy. And so a harsher sentence than even what prosecutors asked for was given in part because the judge saw it as a way to deter people from trying to do similar crimes in the future. Okay, so none of this really gives a great backdrop for the exact moment. And in some ways, it feels really puzzling that crypto should be getting so much attention and backing in politics now. But if you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. For one, FTX's collapse was symptomatic of a lack of regulation that exists for crypto trading and crypto assets. And the crypto industry has gotten really frustrated by what it sees as a regulation by enforcement approach. And so there have been a bunch of lawsuits against crypto companies. They view that as unfair because those laws harken back to decades prior, and they say we need new laws to protect our industry and protect the public interest. One of the other reasons that we're seeing a lot of this money come in now is that prices of Bitcoin are up. Prices of cryptocurrency are higher, and when people have more money, they are going to use it. And this is likely to be a close election, and when an election is close, possible wedge issues do matter. And so you seek to get room from wherever you think you can. So FTX was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. The crypto industry has been trying to get legislation passed for years that would make it easier for companies to operate in the United States and with a clear legal backdrop. I'm not going to get into financial law, but a lot of the regulations that are applied to crypto companies and crypto assets hail from the 1930s. And proponents of crypto say that's outdated and that you need new legislation to regulate it. Skeptics say that, crypto firms should be held to the same standards as every other financial firm and everyone else marketing a financial asset, and that the current rules make it difficult, if not impossible, to run a crypto business in the United States. Sam Bankman-Fried was one of the leading advocates for new federal crypto legislation before FTX collapsed, which is an irony that we can all ponder. And there was a bill that he had pushed for ahead of the collapse that many in the industry actually really hated, thinking that it would benefit him more than others in the ecosystem. FTX's collapse, though it did strengthen the idea that if people are going to be buying and selling crypto anyways, there should be new laws to make sure that something of that nature does not happen again. If you think about it, it does make sense because the government regulates, even if the government doesn't like it, the government regulates many other things that it considers bad for you, like tobacco and alcohol. So even if people may not support crypto itself, there's a thought in the crypto industry that it's here to stay, people are going to trade it anyways, and so you need new legislation to make sure that that can be done safely. On the other hand, there are some who don't want new legislation because there's a fear that that would legitimize the industry and potentially encourage it to become more ingrained in the financial system. So another complaint by the crypto industry is that the regulator currently charged with enforcing the laws has really ramped up civil lawsuits, this being things that they can't throw a company in jail for or executives of a company in jail, but basically suing them for large sums of money. And so these civil lawsuits against crypto companies have ramped up. In 2023, the agency charged 50%, the agency brought more than 50% greater actions against crypto companies than the year prior. And so, even just anecdotally, the number of times that I've been on the train going somewhere and just glancing at my phone and seeing that the SEC has sued someone new in the crypto industry is insane at this point. I have no idea how they're possibly going to litigate all of these. And so there's been a huge increase in enforcement actions that has galvanized the crypto industry and brought ire that previously hasn't existed. So even executives who used to take a really measured stance toward regulators and the government have become galvanized as what they see as an unfair crackdown against the industry. And those who already viewed the Biden administration, under whom the SEC is currently running, as a foe for the industry, have really decided to organize. And so in the past, you had, a largely Sam Bankman-Fried-led effort to put money into political fundraising and try and get desired effects that way. Before, it used to be a very one-off type circumstance. Now the industry has banded together, and they have pooled their money to have more influence and make decisions in a way that they think can have good outcomes. So Bitcoin's prices are back at an all-time high, and because of this, people have a lot of money with which to throw into politics. And that means that, we're seeing these huge donations start rolling in. I can't remember when we last had an election that wasn't tight, but this one is likely to be extremely narrow. The American voting system being as strange as it is, you can have candidates win the popular vote but lose the election and vice versa. And it means that the election will likely be decided by a handful of voters in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona, among other states. Your vote still matters, please vote, but it may not tip the scales of the presidential race. And so because of the ire at the Biden administration and the lawsuits that the Securities and Exchange Commission has been running, you've seen a lot of Republicans galvanize around crypto as potentially one of those issues. The organization I mentioned earlier among crypto executives has coalesced around one main super PAC, and it's called Fairshake. And it doesn't sound like a political action committee. Fairshake just sounds like a benign, general issue PAC. And that's likely partly intentional. But it's pretty much only funded by big pocket donors from the crypto industry. And a lot of the times that the super PAC talks about supporting different candidates, they're not airing ads that talk about crypto. Their goal is to elect candidates that they think will be friendly to the industry and craft good legislation for it, rather than actually telling people, we want you to vote on crypto. They are courting these politicians, hoping that when they get into office, they will craft policies that might aid the industry. Apparently, I don't think this is going to work. Okay, that's not going to work. I had one of those ads prepared, but that's fine. And so they've been throwing money to date in some of these small primary races, and we're getting into the point where we're starting to see them really ramp up spending at this moment, which is something I am heavily focused on for the moment. Most of this money all of this money is going to congressional candidates. And so if you think back to Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law, that's all Congress. And so they want federal laws, therefore they are putting their money into candidates for Congress for the House and the Senate. This all takes us up to about 5 months ago. Prior to that, discussions of crypto were still pretty concentrated to the industry itself. People like me were watching money potentially going into the congressional races, but it hadn't really gone into the presidential sphere. And then in May, that shifted pretty quickly when former President Donald Trump started saying that that crypto was an innovative industry that the US needed to support and let operate here. He held a press conference at Mar-a-Lago, his Florida residence and social club, hosting crypto fans and people who bought some of his previous crypto assets that he's sold. And Trump said that, and someone in the crowd at that event asked if his campaign was taking crypto donations. And President Trump said that if it didn't, he would change it. And weeks later, his campaign announced that they would begin accepting donations in crypto. And as I pointed to in the past, this is a position shift for the former president. He previously had said that crypto was based on thin air and was a scam against the dollar. And so you've seen a shift in attitudes among at least him as a presidential candidate. And so FEC data is the bane of existence for many reporters. They actually created their own data structure to share data, which is inconvenient at best. And so we then had to do a whole bunch of reporting to figure out how to even analyze the crypto data that would wind up coming in. It wound up being this really convoluted system that led a lot of publications to double count how much money was being raised, because they were, so if I donate 5 Bitcoin to Jolie, that's counted as money in, but then they don't want to keep it in Bitcoin, so they sell it, which looks like money out, and then they report the dollars as money in. And so it's really easy to like double count how much money is going in. And so we had to sift through all of that, my colleague Anthony DeBarros and I. And so we were going through this database that we have of political campaign contributions from the FEC and trying to figure out how much money had been raised. And so this is a snapshot of one of the other issues with reporting out this story was that if you look at the little snippet of the spreadsheet, it doesn't mark what donations are technically made in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. You just see the dollar amount that was brought in. And then you look into the description and you see the Bitcoins and you see like all of this other stuff. So it's not really easy to go down through the data and say, here's the Bitcoin transactions. You have to really go through and like double check everything. But what the reader saw was this very clean story on how the Trump campaign in its first kind of report on this brought in $3 million in crypto donations. This is a drop in the bucket compared to the $331 million that he raised overall. But one of the things that I was interested in is that we had all of the raw data for this. I knew every single person who had donated crypto to him. I knew where they lived. I knew what their occupation was. And with that, I could probably find their phone number. And so I started calling all of them and did a story based off of the crypto donors who were supporting the former president. And one of the questions that I had for them was, are you a single issue crypto voter? I had had a lot of people calling me saying, like, there are people whose votes are going to be swung by this. They exist. And I was curious to see if some of them had donated Bitcoin. Not a single one of them told me that they were a single issue crypto voter. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but within that sample size, I didn't find any. But they all said that, you know, for them, it was something they had previously been interested in and was a little bit of a sweetener. And so this brings us to the present moment. We are a month away from Election Day right now, a sentence that just caused my anxiety levels to spike. And the main thing that I'm currently interested in is a new crypto project that former President Trump and his family have just announced. We've written some stories on this being potentially ripe for conflicts of interest, including that, you know, former President Trump, if in office, could issue executive orders and appoint regulators who might be friendly to his interests. And meanwhile, there's a lot of crypto fundraising still happening, both from the Trump campaign and for congressional elections. And so we're starting to see that money get deployed. We're seeing where that money is going. And that's something that I will be following very closely, along with how Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate, winds up forming her position on crypto. And so it's unclear whether this will actually have an influence in what happens in congressional races or the presidency, but this is the most money we have ever seen from the crypto industry go into politics. Lastly, get in touch. I'm always happy to speak with people. Eloise is on the left and Oliver is on the right, and they are my anxiety cats. They're bonus content for making it to the end and sitting through all of that, so thank you guys.
Hi guys. So I just of course want to say thank you, Caitlin, for such an amazing presentation. We will go ahead and move into some questions. And so I did want to ask you, for those that may be students in the audience, what do you think are some trends in business or data journalism that you think they are emerging and they should be aware of going into their careers?
I mean, if you're interested in journalism or business, honestly, read everything that you can. I don't know about like trends within business journalism itself. Journalism is such a constantly evolving area, and it's really a matter of reading everything you can and finding something that you're passionate about. If you are interested, whether it's programming or audio or video or whatever it winds up being, you're going to learn skills and you're going to keep adding to those, and those will make you more valuable.
Of course, thank you. And then, as you mentioned before, finance and crypto tend to be such technical and jargon-heavy industries. What do you do as a journalist to help make that more accessible for the everyday reader, but also still unbiased?
Yeah, so I try to avoid jargon wherever possible in any of my stories. Sometimes it's inevitable, and then you explain it, and then I form all of these pet peeves. I really hate the word liquidity, which is a piece of jargon used to describe how easy it is to buy or sell something. But by and large, I just try to keep it out of my copy. And like, because in my mind, all it does is pose a barrier to the reader. It makes it really hard if you're trying to learn the jargon, because I am not going to be a good resource for that. But for me, it's just about making it as understandable to the layman person as possible, if they're interested in knowing what a basis point is or whatever other jargon. It was actually funny because when we were covering the trial of Sam Bankman-Fried, the FTX founder, the whole argument from the prosecution and the defense had a bunch of jargon in it. And I sat there staring at a colleague who sat through that with me, being like, what is the chance that the jury understands any of this? Like, they were trying to explain everything for like the Metropolitan Transit Authority worker sat in the back trying not to fall asleep. And I'm just like, how are they understanding this? And you saw really different styles on how each of them explained terms, which was interesting. But even with that, my colleague kept a list of random jargon that she would encounter, and I was just like, yeah, I'm not even explaining that because like it literally does not matter.
That is amazing. Is there any story that you have done or worked on that's to this day still had the most lasting impact on you?
Impact on me? I don't know if there's a story that I've done that I kind of felt has changed my perspective or my trajectory that much. There's stories that I've done that have had different impacts on the community. I think the reporting that me and many others did after the deaths at Hollywood Hills probably had the most impact from a legislative standpoint. There's other stories that I've done that have expanded my skills to different levels. One of those was a story I did on a travel company, a travel currency exchange company in the UK being hacked, in which I got the malware code from a source of mine, and then went to my editor and was like, I'm gonna go deploy ransomware and I'm working with the data editor to like interview the hackers. And he was like, okay, have fun. And so like we did it all very safe and secure. Please don't do this at home. And that was probably my favorite from a technical standpoint, because I had never really worked in quite as much of a cybersecurity way of having to make sure systems don't get infected and make sure everything was completely battered down before doing reporting, and got some interesting stories out of that one.
Oh, that is awesome. Well, I want to give the opportunity as well to open it up to the audience a little bit. If anyone has any questions or any topics that they found really interesting that they would love for Caitlin to expand upon today.
We have a mic coming.
Hello, my name is Brooke. I just have a question about the shift you made from standard journalism to data journalism. I'm sure there's a big learning curve there. How do you think you went about developing the programming and data analysis skills you needed to be successful?
Yeah, so I got fortunate in that there was a professor on campus already doing some work on using programming and journalism, but that actually wasn't how I originally got into it. I had signed up for this, what I thought would be an easy class called Communication on the Internet, because I had sold my soul to the alligator and I had no time, and I was like, I need an easy class about what a Facebook post made me feel. It wound up being not a perfectly structured class on HTML and CSS, but it wound up kind of being the thing that piqued my interest. And while I got incredibly lucky that there was one professor that I later forced into being my mentor, a lot of it was just experimenting on my own. So I started Googling people who were doing the types of stories that I wanted to do one day, and shamelessly emailing them and asking, what languages should I learn? How should I learn them? What resources do you recommend? Am I being too annoying yet? And so I cold emailed a lot of people in the industry and was just like, you've never heard of me, I have no pedigree, I'm a somewhat functioning sophomore, junior, whatever it is. And people, especially in data journalism, people are really keen to share knowledge because it's a really small community. And honestly, we're all just nerds. I get so excited when one of the students I speak to winds up having a great story or has learned this new skill. And I have some that keep in touch with me every semester, and I'm really excited to see what they do. So it's just a matter of you figure out the thing that interests you, and you kind of go deep into it, and you ask every dumb question that you can think of, because trust me, I have asked them, everyone else has asked them, everyone was a student once.
Are there any other questions? Perfect.
Good evening. I'm Nolan, and I'm a graduate aerospace engineer, and I follow the world of investment a little bit, as I'm sure many of us do. From your experience, if we are to take a traditional American company like Boeing, and you may or may not know that Boeing's taken a hit, it's not going to disappear, because in the civilian market, it owns half the share of the world's airplanes. It's Boeing and European, what is it called? Airbus, right, based primarily in Toulouse, France. And maybe China is coming up with something, but it's not prevalent yet. So even if Boeing stock takes a hit, which it has, there's still some intrinsic value. Now, with regulation, Bitcoin sort of got a nod from the SEC, it seems, from a novice like myself. Does that mean that Bitcoin is never going to go down to zero? Because it sort of has I don't want to say a green light, but some kind of an acknowledgement by a federal agency.
So I think what he's referring to for context is that the Securities and Exchange Commission, one of the big regulators, they greenlit some investment products that are basically filled with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin isn't itself publicly traded, but these other assets holding them are. And so to some degree, that has made Bitcoin more of a part of the traditional financial system, and I can't give financial advice, I'm not qualified for that, but anything can go to zero. Things are only worth something if everyone collectively agrees that they are. And that's true of Bitcoin, and it's also true of the US dollar. You think the US dollar has value because you know that if you walk across to the hub and you go to Chick-fil-A or whatever is there now, 'cause I'm probably dating myself, like you can go exchange 5 of those for like a thing of fries or whatever $5 gets you on campus now, I'm afraid to ask. With Bitcoin, it's the same where, even if it is part of investment products regulated by the SEC, nothing is ever against going to zero. If all of a sudden everyone wakes up one morning and they go, actually, we're really into Dogecoin now, or like, we just don't like crypto anymore. Like, all of the money can't move. And it also winds up being, you can get these kind of momentum effects where the example I gave of the dollar-pegged cryptocurrency that went to zero, it didn't start off going to zero, it started off going to 90 cents, and then 93, and then 85, and then 90, and then 50. And so you have these fear mechanisms, these fear responses that kick in from a psychological standpoint, and a lot of markets is psychology, where all of a sudden, if enough people get scared, you think that everyone else knows something you don't. And so it winds up being a really hard thing to kind of call from that perspective.
I think we have time for probably one more question to wrap up.
Hi, my name is Mia. I just wanted to ask, it seems that you've placed a lot of emphasis on not using a lot of jargon in your pieces and kind of making them digestible, as you beautifully articulated a lot of these concepts today. But how do you walk the line between making a topic digestible and not making it dumbed down too much?
Yeah, I mean, in general in finance, you're already dealing with very jargon-filled topics, and part of my concern is always, you don't want to dumb it down, and you certainly have readers who are more sophisticated in their knowledge. And I think for some of the coverage we do of, say, hedge funds or asset managers, where we have an audience for the Wall Street Journal who is very financially savvy, it doesn't necessarily mean that people reading us for crypto coverage are as savvy about that specific field. And so there will be times where I will include a bit of jargon that I think people don't know and should be explained, and that will be within the piece. And then there are other times where I think it just serves a barrier to the reader, and especially a lot of the crypto coverage can attract much younger readers, and so those aren't people that I necessarily want to throw like, all of these jargon on liquidity and market depth and arbitration and all of these other words that I could throw out that you would have no idea what they mean. And so unless the point of the story, I think, is very heavily rooted in the need to understand that jargon, usually what I'm saying is what is the most important thing from the reader to get, and will explaining that terminology help or hinder that?
Perfect. Well, I again just want to say thank you guys so much for your questions and so much for your time today. And of course, thank you so much to Caitlin. And I hope you will all have such a great day.
There is a reception upstairs in the O'Neill Reading Room as well, so feel free to join us upstairs as well.